Hi guys, so what I'm going to do today is show you a quick and dirty way of creating the impression of sweat or water on your characters. So probably works better with sweat, but an easy way to make it look like the character's just wet instead. Now, one of the problems with wet skin is that they often have drips of water and stuff like that. Imagine that Michael here has just come straight out of a pool. To really sell this, he's going to have little drips running down him and, you know, drips on his forehead and all of that kind of stuff. And there are some products that have drips built into them, and they combine it with a bump map and all of that kind of stuff to create a very realistic wet skin surface. They're mostly available now for DAZ Studio. I've not seen any really good ones for a long time for Poser, and that is why you might want to create your own quick and dirty substitute. Now, this map here, this wetness or sweat map, is not terrifically convincing, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why, but I can get into some of those later. But for certain products, there were never released wet maps with proper drips and stuff like that, so you're stuck with either never being able to make them look wet, or else you have to try and do it yourself. So what I imagine here is these guys have just been in a sauna or something like that, and I want to make them look hot and sweaty. So what we're going to do, the thing that makes a figure's skin look as if it's sweaty is the amount of specularity, and the specularity is the way the light reflects off the surface. So if I compare this to them dry, so here they are with almost no specularity. So you see on Victoria here, there's a little bit of sheen down her arm here, and some reflections on her eyes and stuff like that. Their eyes render badly in Superfly. I would sort those out. So specularity is the way that the light interacts with the surface of the skin. So you could consider it to be the highlights or the reflections on the surface. So here's the sweaty version. Now, what is sweat? Well, sweat is basically water, you know, human water that comes out of your skin. So it's mixed with minerals and salts and stuff, but it is basically water. And if you recall from the material nodes that have an index of reflectance, water has a much different reflectance index to skin, for example, so it reflects the water a lot more. Now, that becomes an issue because it changes these highlights. The highlights become a lot more pronounced. You'll see here. Incidentally, little pro tip here: if you're going to do a wet map, you really need the nipples to stand out a little bit, because they whilst they might look realistic completely flat on a map here without any specularity or wetness, as soon as you start putting some shine on, they really shows up how flat they are. Okay, so how do we change the specularity to create this impression of sweat? Well, of course, as you might expect, it all happens in the material room. So I'll go to the material room here, and I'm going to click on Michael's face because I want to just show you something else first. So Michael's face has a number of maps. This is a very simple map from Mech 3D. It's Muchacho. It's a really badly done map in some ways. It has no subsurface and it has no edge blending. Very, very simple map. But that also means that it behaves really well if you render it in Superfly. So the weakness in Firefly becomes a strength in Superfly. You don't need to rewire it or run easy skin or anything to get it to behave. It just renders straight out the box apart from the eyes. So what we have here is a 2D map. This is the bump map, and what the bump map does is we plug it into the bump map area here. Oh, actually, I think this might be the bump map. I think they're combined. Right, so we plug the bump map into the bump channel, and what that does is it creates, in this case, pores and surface details. We talked about this a lot in my video on displacement, and these pores and surface details then create areas of specularity up close. I'm sure you've all seen renders where the characters, particularly males, their skin look like their surface pores were just much more obvious than they really would be in a normal human being. In a normal person, you'd have to be up close with a magnifying glass for the pores to stand out that much. But because it became a thing with bump maps that everybody was putting pores in, suddenly people were overusing it, setting the bump too high, and it looked unrealistic. But a small bit of pore detail, and perhaps lips would be a good example, where you've got cracked lips or something like that, or down here with the nipples where you've got some kind of creasing happening on the nipples where they're not completely flat and the pores are much more stood out. The bump map is used to create the impression of extra depth, and that impression is created by the light reflecting off the extra depth. So with this map here, what we have is a map that has the bump map plugged into the bump channel. We have the diffuse map plugged into the diffuse channel. And because this is poser 12, unfortunately, the wiring the connections don't work how they used to. So in the past, with poser 10 or earlier, this blin is a way of creating reflection basically, or shininess. It's a more advanced version of specularity, I guess. And if I open it up so as you can see the parameters, you've got eccentricity, specular roll-off, and reflectivity. So basically you can think of it like this. Reflectivity is how much shine it's got. Eccentricity is how shiny the surface is. You might consider that to be roughness in other models. And specular roll-off is how sharp or smooth the specular edges are. So what we've got is this specular map here plugged into a blin to create the color, I guess you'd say, and then that is plugged into the specular color, and in theory what that does is creates the reflection on the skin. But because this is a pre-poser 11 map, see, it has this dotted line, so that means that this is a bad connection, so it means that anything from here onwards isn't actually working. However, it's also, and this is why I say it's a bad map, because it's also been wired up to do the same thing in the alternate specular channel, which kind of means that this was obsolete in the first place. Anyway, here's how we're going to create specular. Now I'm going to do it in two different ways. So look at the wiring of this face model here. So this is a dry skin. This is the default how it comes from the vendor. So discount this alternate specular down here for now, which was redundancy built into the texture. So it was a specularity map. Didn't need to be plugged into a blin, but they just did that to create more control over the map. And then it's plugged into the specular. So the simplest version would be specular map plugged into specular color, and that is how most people wire up a specular map before poser 11. Now look at Victoria over here. I'll just click on her face to select her texture. Now you can see this map is a much more advanced map. So what it does is it creates a much more realistic, nice skin color when it's rendered. And in this case, all of the specularity goes through the alternate specular. So you'll see the specular color here is turned to 0 in the specular setting, and then the value is turned to 0. So that has no impact at all on the end result. Pro tip: you can sometimes set the value high on a transparent material, and even though all of this stuff happens, this will create a reflection, kind of a reflection. Right, but ignore that for now. Let's go down here and open this up a bit, just so as you can see there really ought to be an expand mode for all this, just to see where things are wired. So here's the alternate specular is plugged back into a blin mode again, so that's quite common. When you're creating specular, you'll generally find that people use one of the nodes here. So I'm going into the nodes, and you choose a lighting node specular. So they generally choose one of these: anisotropic, Phong, glossy, blin, specular, or K's microfacets. And they're just different ways of achieving a shine, but blin is the most common. Glossy can be very useful if you want to create water effects, but I'm just going to stick with what the original creator did. So we've got blin, then we've got plugged into that. Let's open that up so as you can see what's happening. So you've got a specular colour there of blue, which seemed to be a habit for a while. I don't like changing specular colour. So what a blue specular colour does is says the reflections are a different colour to the lighting in the room. In this case, quite a dark blue. And that can be done to compensate sometimes for a badly created skin colour. Or it can be done to give, if you can see here, let me go back to here so as you can see her face. And you can see there's a kind of a bluish sheen there compared to his skin, which is pure white. And yeah, that can create a more exotic look. But I don't want my skin texture to create the exotic lighting. I want the lighting to create the lighting, if that makes any sense. So we talked in my video on displacement about baking in lighting, and here what the skin texture is baked in this blue specular lighting. And I don't think that's a good idea. I don't like it when creators do that, because it's created a mood on the texture which I may not want to create. What if I was taking this to a beach, or I was taking it to a living room where it's got a very white light, or a living room where it's very yellow, and you've got this blue specular built in. But anyway, let's move away from that for a second. So we'll go back to her face. So I'm going to click on her face again to pick that material up. And you'll see also that Poser very kindly remembers the layout of these nodes that I started to disassemble. So we've got specular colour here. So the first thing I would do is change that to white. So I clicked on it, and now I'm changing it over here to white. So now it's white, so it's not casting any sheen. So it's her face. Usually if I was building a map of some sort, I'd start with the torso because it's the most visible, but the face is the second most important. So then what we have is a whole bunch of edge blending nodes here. And these, you won't find them in every texture, but what they do is change the way that the blend texture is applied on the edges, and can sometimes on the edges of the figure as they kind of curve around out of sight, and they can tend to make it more realistic. I'm not going to talk about those for now. Suffice it to say, I just think that we should leave them in for now. If you've got the expertise to change them, then that's fine. So what we have here, so we've got 3 edge blending modes that are affecting the specular roll-off, the eccentricity, and the specular colour. But the specular colour is where the specularity for the map is built in. Now, it's very important to remember. Remember we said that the specular is the lighting, and often a specular map can bring a figure to life by creating custom highlights and lowlights on the figure. For example, here, see the lips are very dark, the eyes are very dark. In actual fact, there's a separate lip map, but see it kind of goes dark around the corner. But for what we're doing, we're just going to replace this specular map with a noise map. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a noise map. And noise maps are in 3D textures. And I'm going to actually, sorry, not a noise map, a spot map. And I'm going to go to here. And I'm going to change this because I want this to basically define the amount of specularity, not its colour. I'm going to change this to black. So it's now black and white. And then I'm going to change the spot size right down. Now, this is easier to work with if it's actually plugged in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this specular map here, the one with the face, and I'm just going to plug this straight into the place where the specular was plugged here. Or I could just go directly into the specular colour, actually. Actually, no, I'm going to do it that way. I'm going to go straight to the specular colour. There you go. And now, just for the sake of tidiness, I'm going to remove detached nodes. That's going to get rid of these 2 that I'm not using anymore, hopefully. Yep. So now we've got our spot map, and you can see it's already had an effect on the face. So let's choose the face camera. So click on here to zoom straight into her face. And you can see at the scale I'm at, the spots, you know, there's a big light, dark bit there and a big light bit there. So I'm just going to mess about with that scale. Until I get those dots, those spots more realistic. So 0.5. How's that? No, still too big. 0.05. Okay, there we go. So now what we have is some kind of dottiness on there. You could mess about here with the softness and the threshold. I'm going to leave that where it is for now. The threshold is the level at which, well, I'll just show you. I'll just go to 0.5. It's basically the level at which something becomes defined as a dot or not. So I'm just going to undo that. And now if I go back to this figure, you'll see now it's got this kind of, this area of dottiness on it. And if I quickly render that, what you'll see is that the white areas end up being shiny and the black areas being not shiny. And the scale that you do that at, determines whether it looks very, very glossy or not so glossy, as well as affecting the, being able to alter the settings I mentioned earlier. Okay. So I'm only rendering at samples of 5 here, but you can see already that that's kind of created a slight shine on the skin surface. Okay. So if I go back to the material here, so I might want that to be more shiny, to be more sweaty or wetter. And I could also achieve that by decreasing the eccentricity. So an eccentricity of 1 is quite flat, and eccentricity of 0 is extremely shiny. And then you can make it shinier still by increasing the reflectivity value. So let me just put this down to 0 and you can see the difference. Now, see how super shiny it is? Obviously that's not realistic, that's not useful for what we're doing, but maybe a level somewhere between the two would work. Bear in mind this is a very low sample rate, just so that you don't have to wait while it renders. Okay, I'll cancel that, there's enough for you to see. So compare that, that's a level of 0, that's a level of 1, so basically like a roughness. So that's not shiny enough, that's too shiny. So like the 3 bears, we go halfway and it will be just right. So pick up the face textures, change the eccentricity, which you can think of as roughness, back to 0.5, halfway, and render that again. One of the beauties of using GPU rendering, if you've got a semi-decent GPU, is that it enables you to do these quick previews when you're trying to build a texture. In the old days, you know, it could take 5, 10, even 50 times longer to do these preview renders, and you really had to understand what the values would do. It's a bit like the difference between a digital camera now and the old film cameras. Nowadays you can go out and try a million things in an afternoon, and there's no developing cost. You can instantly see on the screen what the results are like. So it's enabled you to learn by experimentation rather than mastering the craft from books. And, you know, I guess purists would say, well, you should have an idea what every single thing will look like before you do it, but I think experimentation is the mother of great results. So you can see here now that's getting to look quite nice, quite sweaty looking. I possibly might go a little bit less shiny than that. Okay, so what I want to show you now is just a nice easy way to copy that texture, that wetness across to all the other parts of the body. So Poser has a fantastic feature. So this is a face map again, and again, look, it's got this blue diffuse. It really annoys me when they use a different coloured base map to put the diffuse map into, because of what they're doing is they're changing that it's compensating for a badly made skin texture, a badly coloured skin texture. This colouring should have been built into the skin texture, not into the diffuse base colour. Anyway, rant over. So Poser has this fantastic feature where you can do apply to all. So supposing I chose all of those and then I do copy, if I did apply to all, that would apply that texture to every other part of Victoria's body. But of course the problem is that she has a face map, then a totally different map on her arms, a totally different map on her body, on her lips, on her eyes. So we can't use that technique, but we can at least use a bit of a shortcut. So what we have here, the components that comprise the things that we've just edited are the blend map and the edge blends that are all plugged into it. So what I'm going to do is, there's two ways you could do this. You can just group them all together like this and then marquee select. Poser uses a marquee crossing, which means that anything that the marquee even just touches slightly, see here the bottom, I'm pointing at the screen as if you can see my finger, what an idiot. See the bottom corner where the cursor is? As that touches there, that automatically selects that. As it touches there, it selects that. So you don't have to fully enclose the area to be part of the group. So I've marquee selected, that's one way you could do it. Or I'll deselect, I can click one, hold down control and click the menu bars of all the other parts I want. That works well when you've got really messy, supposing they're all in the middle here, and a marquee select's going to pick up loads of other stuff. So we're going to use that here. We're going to do copy. So now what we've done is copied just the components that apply the specularity, the wetness map. And now all I'm going to do is just apply them to the other parts. So I'll start with the lips. So I'll go to the lips here. And you'll see here that the in this case, sorry, I've already done it on the lips, but I let me apply it to another part. Okay, we'll do it to the nostril. Okay, so what I want to replace is this blend and the edge blends here. Fortunately, they're nicely laid out in a line, so I can just marquee select them. And now if I do replace, Poser will kindly replace all of those with the bits that I've done. The one thing I wish it would do is replug the end part into the place it came from, but we can just drag that to the alternate diffuse. And I do actually want to talk about the lips for a moment. So with the lips here, I've got exactly the same level of diffuse and wetness, but it could well be that the lips, when rendered, should be slightly less shiny, slightly less wet looking, because there's more displacement, more, I guess, micro facets, again, more facets on the lips. You know, the lips are a lot less smooth than the skin, and so they displace the light on a smaller scale. So you could possibly, let me just render that with the lips as it's set up at the moment. Yep, so we can see the amount of shininess on the lips there, which you might consider to be less realistic. You could possibly change that level of blend here on the lips. so that that's less shiny. Maybe take that to 0.75. And see how that looks. Obviously the area render is a great way just to test a little part that you're working on. So in my opinion that's ever so slightly better. Just comparing that to the previous one. Very, very slight difference, yeah. See this specularity in this area? Slightly less. I think that looks slightly better. That doesn't, you know, very shiny lips always look like they're glossed or deliberately done to make look fuller or more sexy. And obviously, for most scenes, you don't really want them to look like that. You want them to be realistic. So, what you would do here now is continue working through all of the parts of your body map. So you do lips, nostrils, face, nipples. Again, with nipples, you'd probably, if they were visible at all, which they aren't in this case, you would probably set the level a little bit less reflective. Head, hip, neck. So they're mostly grouped in a nice order. So all of the skin textures are all in a group, starting from eyebrows all the way down to leg. So if you do all of those, ignore the fingernail. I don't know why that's in the middle of there. I guess it's because it's near the arm. But really that should be down the bottom with the toenail on its own. So you're going to apply that to all of those. And eventually what you'll have is a figure. And I'll show you here. So here's one, as they say in Best Blue Peter style, that I created earlier. M for main for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide that body. And here's one that I created earlier. So I'm just going to select Victoria Wet and make her visible, and you'll see now that I've applied that to all of the body parts. And you can tweak this. You can decrease the size of the spots if you like. You can increase the amount of shininess according to your preferences, but then where you end up is something like, drum roll please, something like this. So she looks nice and wet. Now obviously to sell this more convincingly, you're going to have to pay attention to this swimsuit probably, because the fabric tends to go darker when it's wet. Depends on what it is, of course, but that would help sell it. You could put drips on it as well. But what I want to show you here is now it's slightly different with this figure. So this is Michael, as I said, with the muchacho texture. Going to select his face. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to paste that into space here, what I did before. But I'm going to get rid of all of this stuff, because I don't need that. All I need is the spots. And then I'm going to wire the spots directly into the specular. And now I can increase the specular value to increase the amount of specularity or the amount of reflection. So here, let's just go to 1 for now. Or no, let's go to 5. Let's really make it super obvious. So 5. And the highlight size I'm going to decrease so as it's right. So his face skin has gone dark here, and that's partly because the way they've wired it up with an alternate specular. But if I render that, again, you'll see that specularity, and you'd want to tweak that for a while. But the main thing that I'm showing you is that there's two ways that you can apply the same specularity effect, the same dots. If you have a skin texture here, whereas advanced specular and advanced diffuse, which tends to give you a nicer result in Superfly, then you're going to have to usually jump in on a blend and or whatever excuse me, whatever else node they had there, anisotropic or glossy or whatever, and then you're going to have to wire your spots in where the specular map was there. If you have a more simple old school texture, these are more likely to be maps that are 5, 10, even more years old. You're going to go down and you're going to wire the spots in directly to the specular colour. Now, there is one more thing that you might want to do. If you were super concerned about mixing in their specular map that the original people had made, so you get the highlights and your wetness. Let's just take this figure. Okay, and I'm just going to find out where the textures are for this figure by clicking. Alright, so it's 3D Celebrity Bell. So I'm just going to copy that path and I'm going to create a new image map. So I'm going to right click in space here, new node, 2D textures. So this is all poser surface node stuff. If you want cycle specific, they're down there, but this will work fine for now. And I'm going to choose image map, which lets me put an image map in. Then I'm going to load an image map there. So what I'm going to do, see Bell Face S. S usually means specular map. C usually means color map. B usually means bump map. Some creators are not that kind and logical in their naming conventions, but most are. So I'm going to use the specular map here. Going to load that, but this time, before I put that into the blend, I'm going to mix them together. So I'm going to have the dots and the specular map, and this is where you might need to do some tweaking. I have no idea what levels we need here, and I'm going to use a math map, which means it performs a mathematical function on the nodes. I'm going to use Blender, and you can open the preview here by clicking on the eye. Then I'm going to take the spots into input 1. Doesn't matter which way round you go. I'm going to take the face into input 2. So now what we've done is blended the dots and the face specular map here into a new map, and that's what I'm going to plug into the specular color. Now you may want to tweak this so that you get more specularity from the dots, or more from the original face specular map, and that blend is done by changing this. You'd either go towards 1, which is a higher component of the bottom input, or towards, don't know, sorry, I clicked that accidentally, ignore that, or towards 0, which is a higher component of the spots. So I'm going to say 0.2 here, because I want this mostly to be the spot map, which is going to give me my effect of the sweat. And now when I render her face, very subtly different texture map. Let's go full face on that. And it's blended those two maps together, so you still keep the original highlights and lowlights, but you also have the sweat as well. And I'll compare that against the other one when it's finished rendering. Hopefully there will be a visible difference. Okay, that should be enough. I don't have to allow it to render the whole thing. And I'm going to set this to be my compare image, hopefully. Very, very subtle. Maybe I'd go more with a 50-50 blend there then. There were some very subtle changes on the highlights of the cheeks, but not enough to really justify the point I'm trying to make. So let's just go 50-50, see if it's a bit more obvious. Which of course it should be. So render that. Okay, good. So let's compare that to the compare image. Yeah, a little bit more around the cheeks here again. It's subtle. I'm not sure if I personally could be bothered to put a blend node in there for the amount of benefit it gets. I think I'd just. The thing is that the wetness map or the spots are so pronounced that they kind of burn out the custom specular map, and I kind of think that should do the talking rather than. Yeah, I think that should be what's doing the talking rather than trying to have a custom specular map as well. Right, okay, so that concludes this. There's two different ways of applying the specularity to faces, as I said, depending on whether you use the specular node, the alternate specular mode, or you use the specular color node. In both cases, leave the default color to white, in my opinion. Don't color them. Let your lighting apply the coloring, not the base colors here. I think that's a really bad way of doing it. Right, hopefully that's helpful, guys. You take care.